The difference is not can you rely on us? It was always can we rely on you?
Well, let's expand it out a bit as well and talk about the Quad. I mean, AUKUS is sort of only part of the I suppose what you might call the sort of collaboration between powers in the Pacific to counter China in many respects. The Quad has sort of gone up and down, I suppose, in terms of how important it is. It's India, the US, Australia, and Japan. Is it still significant, George?
Surely, particularly with Japan in it. India is a question mark. Australia is already involved, and the United States. So it's AUKUS without the British, but with the Japanese. And that makes perfect sense because the north end of China is Japan. The southern end of China's access points, if you will, is Australia. And backing it up is the US Navy as a whole. So it's in the interest of Japan, certainly, to have that relationship. It's in the interest of the United States to have a relationship with Japan. It's also an Australian interest. So one of the things the United States wants, it's not simply withdrawing from the world. It wants to reduce its presence in the world by having allies that have significant forces. When we went into Europe after World War II to block a potential Russian-Soviet attack, it became deeply entangled in Europe because of the condition of Europe at that time, and remains entangled. In the Australian case, we remained very close friends and collaborated on intelligence matters, Five Eyes and stuff like that. But as China evolved, Australia became a little more vulnerable. And the United States Navy certainly spread itself for a while to handle this. But then the idea that the Australians are big boys now, and they can do it themselves, emerged. It was a very reasonable thing. Interestingly, the Australians didn't resist it too much. They first made a deal with the French. They then double-crossed the French and made a deal with the Americans.
Classic great power politics, I suppose.
It also has to do with wanting to keep the Americans happy.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, obviously Australia is very important there. Japan as well, as we've talked about. We talked about a bit on the last podcast too, their increasing importance and how they're sort of stepping back into developing their military. India, though, India feels a bit like it's been thrown under the bus by Donald Trump recently. What's their role in the Quad?
Its role in the Quad initially was that it was hostile to the Chinese. The Chinese and the Indians had on their borders some very severe fights. The Chinese were supporting a mortal enemy of India, Pakistan, giving it heavy weapons. So when we look at that question, what were we doing there? We were trying to build a multilateral force that would be a threat not to Chinese mainland, but any force that emerged from China. Given the fact that India became unreliable from the American standpoint because of their relationship with the Russians and Russian oil, the Indians obviously don't feel very comfortable in their role in Quad, even though they still don't have a great relationship with China. They are better relationships. So as the alliance systems in the region change, Quad changes. What won't change is basically AUKUS. These are fundamental relationships. The United States depends on Australia as the southern link of its contain China policy. The British are our allies everywhere and participating to the extent they can. But Australia is very important. And to me, the most important relationship that's going to evolve in the Pacific is going to be Australia and Japan, the northern point and the southern point. And we see that almost every day evolving, that relationship, both economically and militarily.
And Australia's bought a number of Japanese, I think they're frigates or other type of naval vessels as well. There's a lot of cooperation going on between them in terms of training and even intelligence sharing potentially as well, I think. So that, that's, as you say, George, really interesting to follow. obviously Australia and Japan in this sense aren't really going to change their tune. They are in the region in that sense. They are involved. But let me ask you, I mean, a number of people in Australia as well, in Japan too, even South Korea, they've been asking questions as Trump in the US seeks to disengage a bit more from the world. The questions have been raised by many people of, is the US still a reliable ally in this sense? In particular for South Korea, they've been saying, well, look, we are somewhat dependent on the American nuclear umbrella, particularly because North Korea now has has nuclear weapons. Are the US still reliable in this sense?
They're reliable because it's in the American interest to have a line of nations that can help us keep them out of the deep Pacific. Obviously, we don't want to see the Chinese fleets, even if they can't land in California, steaming up and down the coast. That's a distant future. The difference is not, can you rely on us? It was always, can we rely on you? Can we rely on the Japanese, for example, to take their massive economy and devote it to their own defense so that we're not the only ones worrying about Taiwan? Can we count on the Australians to spend the money, they're a fairly well-to-do nation, in protecting their own sea lanes? So the questions that are posed, can the United States be relied on, should be reversed. In the past 80 years, could these countries be relied on? They could be relied on by the United States, which was in the United States to do so. But ultimately, the idea that the United States has a moral obligation to be reliable to all these countries, it will be reliable because it's in their interest, but these countries have the ability, 80 years after World War II, having built massive economies and everything like that, to defend themselves, to contribute to it. So where the world asks, is the United States reliable? America asks, when will you guys become reliable? And that's the other question. So one of the things that Trump has done, he's not broken the relationship with Australia by any means. He's not broken the relationship with Japan or South Korea. But he's looking at their economic development and saying, okay, you're no longer solely dependent on the United States. Will we come to your aid? Yes, because it's in our interest. Because if Japan fell to China, unlikely event, South Korea fell, Australia fell, our control of the Pacific would be endangered, and so on. So the real issue here is nations that assumed that the Americans had a moral obligation to defend them while they enjoyed their healthy economies has been changed, moderated. Can we be relied? Yes, because it's in our interest. And that's what drives nations' interests.
For the full episode and much more, go to geopoliticalfutures.com/podcast.